Sorry. There we go. Marcia Burke-Bigler, Chair.
Good morning. Yes, I'm here.
Kitty Jung, Vice Chair.
Present.
Vaughn Hartung.
Present.
Jeannie Herman. Bob Lucy. Charles Moore, Fire Chief. David Watts-Vial, Deputy District Attorney. Madam, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Chief.
Yeah, mine won't turn on.
Talk louder. We'll try this one. There, that's better. Item 3 is public comment. Comment heard under this item will be limited to 3 minutes per person and may pertain to matters both on and off the Board of Fire Commissioners agenda. The district will also hear public comment during individual action items with comment limited to 3 minutes per person. Comments are to be made to the Board of Fire Commissioners as a whole. Madam Clerk, is there any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Very good. Item 4 is Commissioners, Fire Chiefs announcements, requests for information, topics for future agendas, and statements relating to items not on the agenda. No discussion among commissioners will take place on this item. I have no announcements, Madam Chair. Item number 7 will be pulled, so
Okay.
I will announce that.
Commissioners, any announcements, questions, comments? Okay, we will close number 4 and move on. Chief.
Item 5 are consent items for possible action.
And I'll second that, and I would like to bring to the attention of the public item 5C, in which we are accepting a donation of 10 complimentary tasting passes for 2 from Wine Road, Sonoma County, in support of the Truckee Meadows Fire Protection's district service against the Sonoma County area fires, and express appreciation for the thoughtful contribution, because we provided assistance in that giant fire in wine country, and this is the reward for 10 staff and their +1 to go wine tasting in Sonoma. So I just wanted to bring
Sounds
the
great.
attention. We really appreciate that.
Sounds great. I have do we have any public comment on?
No, ma'am.
Sorry, on this. I have a motion from Commissioner Hartung. Do I have a second?
I seconded it.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? Motion carries. Chief.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 6 is the IFF Local 3895 report. I don't see anybody here from the union. So apparently there is no presentation today.
All right, we will move on, and 7 has been pulled, so number 8, your fire chief report, sir.
Number 8 is a fire chief report for possible action. And first, our Verde fire issues update. I'll ask the clerk to hand out a map and a memorandum from Dyer Engineering. The district has obviously heard from Mike Brown a couple of meetings ago about what the issues are. We know that the 2 top issues are water supply and defensible space. I have contacted Dyer Engineering to take a look at the water system issues, and they've given me a memorandum and a scope of work for development of a master plan. In our early discussions, we think that part of the solution will be to see Tumwa bring in a water main a little bit closer. But it's going to be on the order of $5 million plus to distribute water infrastructure through the entire Verde community, and I think that's probably conservative. So part of the solution, we think, would be extending the water main somewhere close, perhaps on Bridge Street, perhaps to the elementary school, and from there we might have a series of cisterns throughout the community. So over the next couple of months, they'll be studying that. In the meantime, I've asked my new Deputy Chief of Operations to survey the area, take a look at our strategy and tactics, which he has done, and we'll be developing some pre-plan information. But we're also concerned about the vegetative growth there, and so we're going to target Verde in the spring and ask citizens to do extensive fuels reduction. We have some sagebrush that's over 8 feet, which means it's about 30 years old. And so some of that has to be harvested and disposed of.
Right.
And it was in Mike's recommendation that we do that. So we have all the materials now, all the equipment to do green waste harvesting and disposal. So we'll be active in the Verde community come this spring.
Okay. So Commissioner Hartung.
Okay, there we go. Our mics are really fishy today. They look like they're on, but apparently they're all being controlled from the back of the room. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Chief, I know at Tumwa, in fact, we'll be discussing it tomorrow with respect to the West Reno Water Company, which will give us some water supply in Verdi eventually. I don't know the exact timing of that. That's all still part of the discussion that we're having, but there has been talk about making sure that we have, at least wherever the main is, putting stems for fire hydrants.
Perfect.
So that will be part of the discussion at Truckee Meadows Water. So we'll definitely want to keep an eye on that, because that'll really be a game changer for Verdi.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I wanted to add that if you look at the map that I handed out, you see how complex it would be to distribute water. All of the light-colored areas are TM, and the pink areas are City of Reno. So it's very difficult to extend water mains through all of those streets. And I've heard it's about $1 million per mile to do that, if not more. So there's some short-term plans and some long-term strategies that we're working.
So Chief, isn't the city of Reno required to put in fire hydrants when they put in a development?
They are, and I understand the development that's going in Verdi now will bring the water line down from Somerset. So there's always chances that that could be extended into Verdi, but it's going to take a civil engineer really to tell me what's the most expeditious way to bring a water main into Verdi.
So these, on this map that you gave us, these two areas in the city of Reno that are set out, are they built already, or is there housing in there already?
There's a development in progress, and I believe that's the one more in the center, the top center. And I believe that those street layouts are proposed. But I do know that there's a water line coming down to where you see TM 3507 and that rather dense area in the center to the right. There is a water line along Highway 40 right there. And to the extent that it goes westerly, that may be as far as it goes. So that's about 2-3 miles away from where we would actually need one.
So this summer when we get, of course I know we never get out of fire season, but this summer when we get back into fire season again, are we going to have a better idea of where water's going to be to protect the community?
I think the master plan will take about 3 months to develop. We'll have a pretty good idea, but again, it's not going to be just water mains. It's going to have to be a system of cisterns and of water mains and a system and operational components to where we can shuttle water back and forth.
And where will the water come from that goes into the cisterns?
Well, they would either be filled through a well and kept full from a well, or they could be filled manually and always just have 5,000 or 10,000 gallons of water in them all the time. That becomes a little bit more of a maintenance chore. But I've heard that if you have a cistern with a well attached to it, that's about $50,000 each. And just by a simple count with the engineer, we could easily use 10 of those. So there's about $500,000 with respect to cisterns. But what a cistern does is it gives us 5,000 or 10,000 gallons of water that we can use immediately until we have the ability to develop a more robust tender shuttle, which can take somewhere around 20 minutes to develop. So the strategy is to have enough firefighting water within the first 20 or 30 minutes and then figure out what we're going to do
To back
if
it
the
up.
fire is more extensive than that.
Which makes sense. Okay, good. Any other questions, anybody? Commissioner Herman, this is your district. Do you have any additional ideas on what they need to do? Okay. All right, thanks, Chief. Next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Update on Deputy Chief of Fire Prevention, the selection process. We just completed that last Friday. We hired Ralph Anderson to do a national search. We had six very highly qualified candidates, and there was general consensus among the panels, which comprised of some private sector executives in the construction industry and the development industry, as well as staff. And the consensus was pretty clear on one candidate. So I'll be contacting the recruiter to make contact with that candidate, and hopefully I'll be able to make an announcement to you very soon.
Okay, good.
Summary on calls to elder care facilities, which is item number 3. That was requested by Commissioner Hartung. I've given you a memo that summarizes our responses to Cascade of the Sierras, and it's interesting that the volume is rather high. If you really look at the map, or the math, it's almost 2 calls out of every 10 we're going to Cascade of Sierras. Some of those calls are of course, urgent, but others are less urgent. I believe it's necessary to have some discussions with the staff there to see if we can reduce the number of times that we're going there, because it is rather expensive to take a fire truck there to assist on a low acuity call. So it is a high call demand for Station 17.
Commissioner Hartung?
Am I on? Okay, good. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chief, this is why I asked for this, and this is, it's not a pejorative comment about Cascade or any elder care facility. I think that there's a higher propensity for a need, which in my opinion equates to, Station 17 is the second busiest station in the district. I'd love to see a rescue. I think a rescue will really give us a lot of additional coverage that could absorb some of those lower level calls. And then, of course, working backwards with REMSA to make sure that REMSA's also responding at the same time. But a rescue just makes more fiscal sense to me than dispatching an engine every time with 3 personnel on it.
I had lunch with Dean Dow of REMSA and have been talking to the fire chief in the city of Sparks about our similar problems. And we also think that responding a fire engine or responding to an ambulance to low acuity calls each time is not sustainable for us, particularly when we see our trend line on our calls continue to go up. So one of the things we've talked about as a potential solution for the future is to do that, but it might look like a paramedic or 2 paramedics perhaps in a Chevy Tahoe, for instance.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Where Sparks and REMSA and us are sharing that resource to be able to handle priority 3s within 15, 17 City of Sparks and perhaps other areas if other jurisdictions want to get on board on that.
Thus, the flex crew.
Yes.
That I have, and that's what I call it, of course. You can label it any way that you want, but that crew flexes throughout the region to try to take up some of that lower level demand, as it were. And the nice idea, I think also too, about having a crew like that is that if, let's just say, and we just talked about Verdi, let's just say that there's a fire up in the Ranchos where we don't have resources, where someone has to drive a tender. Now we've got, let's say, 2 men on an engine, 1 fellow driving a tender, and then you've got 2 from the rescue showing up, which gives us 5. Yes. And that's that's an initial great response. So I think that this type of discussion is the impetus for working more of those flex crews or those 2 men in a Tahoe. I mean, I think that that's a great idea. That's really, it was pointed out to us some time ago that not necessarily in the United States, but places in, I believe the country was Australia, where somebody would respond on a motorcycle because they could literally get to some of those outlying places much faster and easier. I'm not suggesting that that's the answer, but certainly flex crews throughout the system, I think it's something that we really need to look at and budget for, and I think it'll take a huge load off of both of our entities, both Sparks and Washoe County.
I believe City of Sparks has the same issue. I've heard Chief Maples say that it's very difficult for them to continue to respond a fire engine to each and every low acuity call. We're starting to wear out our fire engines
Yes.
prematurely.
Oh, absolutely.
Part of that solution lies in also the dispatching processes, which I'll get into during AVL, but there's a whole series of things that we need to look at in order to make that work well.
And you know, Chief, what I'd like to do, and we can certainly start talking about this offline, but I'd like to talk about how we see Station 17, how it morphs with the City of Sparks, because there's a lot of development that's in the City of Sparks that we don't see. I mean, there's a huge development going off the end of Rockwell right now that's in the City of Sparks. We do have mutual and auto aid. I don't know whether there's an intent on the city of, or by the City of Sparks rather, to build an additional station on the outlying area. There was an intent when they were pushing forward with the West Reno plan, or West Pyramid plan, forgive me, I misspoke, up in Section 33, which is above the high school, Section 33 being in the City of Sparks, and then just below that, the high school and all of those other developments still in Washoe County. And I know that there was an intent to build a station up there, but they may have moved that intent somewhere down to farther to the east and maybe just a small amount to the south, which will take some of the load off of us also assisting with the City of Sparks. But I still think the flex crews are the key throughout the region, whether it's, you know, down south, it's not economical to dispatch an engine for every single call. It's just not. And I think the wave of the future is going to really re-look at how we dispatch. And look, one man can drive an engine as long as we know that we've got maybe, you know, somebody else showing up with a tender and you know, 3 other guys or 4 other guys showing up in rescues. So you end up with the crew all on the scene at the same time, and an engine really, in my opinion, only should be dispatched when we've got a fire.
Well, there are some things embedded in our labor agreement that requires certain staffing on an engine, so I'm not sure that would be possible in the current context, but nevertheless, REMSA and I believe the City of Sparks and us do see some advantage in talking about how we can send a lower level resource to lower acuity calls.
You know, I mean, I guess the closing thought is why do I need to send my 747 to pick up 4 people?
Depends on who the 4 people are.
I guess so. Because that's what we're doing right now. I mean, you know, it's a huge amount of resource.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you,
That's a
Madam
good
Chair.
point.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome. Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Chief.
Item 4 is an update on AVL, automatic vehicle location dispatch. I wanted to bring your attention to a strategic plan that the Emergency Services Advisory Board has developed, and I was looking for Christina Conti here. I don't see her, and was hoping perhaps she should come up. But nevertheless, that AVL is actually in the strategic plan of the MSAB board. And at the last meeting, I spoke to the need. I was followed by the Chief Maples and also Dean Dow, and even the City of Reno, Chief Nolan stood up and recognized the need to where we need to send the closest unit to an emergency medical call, because quite frankly, we're having calls that are high acuity. And we can have resources that are very, very close and they're not being dispatched. So I believe where it starts is looking at a study and going back perhaps even 3 years to see what the experience would be. I would want this board to make sure that it would understand that if we're doing that, what would be the additional call volume on our citizens. And I think all the other partners would want to understand that as well. So what are you really picking up in terms of additional calls? So
To do automatic aid,
to do AVL.
AVL.
Anecdotally, I think it's not going to be necessarily all that much. I really don't. But nevertheless, I will let the data speak for itself. I do believe Christina Conti is going to do a study on her own, but I would like to know what our experience would be for all calls to see if that's even possible. But the problem is not just based in everybody agreeing to do it. It's also based in some technological limitations. There she is. And the fact that we have 4 different dispatch centers, one for REMSA, one for the city of Sparks, one for us, and one for the city of Reno, gets in the way of being able to dispatch efficiently. And even when we do call mutual aid for one of our partners, that can sometimes take as much as 5 minutes to get the call from one dispatch center to another. And we're wasting a lot of time, in my opinion. And time is something that we don't have a lot of when somebody's in cardiac arrest or respiratory arrest. So I think to not do this and not have strong collaboration on all 4 partners is just not good service to our citizens. So I will confer with Christina on how the study might proceed, but I also want to include other fire calls perhaps, so we really understand what the effect is.
Okay,
I will add that the solution is not going to be a matter of months. It could be
Yeah.
perhaps a couple of years or even longer before we can zero in on a solution.
do you think we could have a solution before Vaughn and I come up for reelection again? That's 2020? Before you die?
The technology exists within CAD and Tiburon. It's just that 4 separate facilities is getting in the way.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Chief.
Item 8, paragraph 5 is Tumwa request for relocation of the South Hills Pump Station to new Station 14. Tumwa contacted me and asked if it would be possible for them to acquire some land in our new Station 14 development. I told them that I would not have any problem with it, but I'd bring it to the board to see if you would have no objections. They're looking for a site that would be about 100 feet by 100 feet. They certainly would pay for all the costs necessary, either purchasing the land or some sort of lease configuration, but their pump station that's just a little bit uphill, I believe is wearing out, and they need to develop something new. So if the board has no objections, I will work with Tumwa on that and bring something back.
Commissioner Arton?
Am I on?
You are.
Here we go. I'm having a difficult time today. Maybe it's my eyes. Chief, when we talked to Tumwa, have we discussed, do we typically have fill stations, water fill stations, so that we can refill our tenders and et cetera? Because I know down in at 14, I think it would be wise for us to have a place to fill a tender,
But we usually do that from an overhead fill valve.
right? I understand.
Station 17 is a little different in that there's a raw water
Yes,
fill station.
I'm familiar.
But
It's
we
been there
would-
for years.
We'd probably have something inside the truck bay to refill.
Oh, I see.
Or we just go to a hydrant and open up a hydrant and connect.
I
and
see.
fill.
Okay. Okay, not, instead of doing an overhead at that, okay. I was hoping to negotiate as part of the deal with Tumwa to just let them build that fill station.
I've got some ideas where Tumwa could help us on the site. We have a drainage easement that needs to be filled and piped.
Okay,
And they have said, whatever it takes, Chief, we're willing to work with you on where this would be on the site. So if we need an access road over that drainage easement, that would be a great thing to have Tumwa fund and do.
okay. Mr. Watsfield, a question, if I may, Madam Chair.
Certainly.
Do we need to give Chief direction to work with Tumwa in the form of a formal motion, or how does that need to work, sir?
The chief, working or not working?
It's working.
See, I can project if we need to.
No, it's not, you're not on.
Got a lot of practice.
Put it on there, because people at home want to hear.
No, the chief asked if there were any objections, and it's going to have to come back for a later item anyway. most of the items on the fire chief report, frankly, all of the items on the fire chief report should be for discussion only. They're not really styled for
Right.
action. So
Okay.
based on what you've said so far, I think the chief has an understanding of what, he'll bring something back, and then you can make a decision as to whether or not you want to do whatever he asks in the future.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just so everybody knows, we got an email that from Tech Services that was letting us know that we do not control these mics today. They are all hot, assume that they're on, and that they have to do it from over there. So that's the trouble that we're having. But it would be appreciative if everybody who spoke into a live mic so people at home could hear our public discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Okay. Chief,
And finally, item 6 is an update on Station 14's, the appraisal and the construction process. We have engaged an appraiser to understand what the value is. I know you've heard from Mr. Ken Crater on his desire to want to purchase. I will need to defer to legal at some point whether or not we can negotiate with Ken Crater exclusively, or if we need to put it out to bid. There may be some support in state statutes where we could negotiate directly with Ken. But nevertheless, we're looking at middle of May to have the building ready for certificate of occupancy, and then we'll need about a month and a half to move in.
good.
The question then will be what we do with the existing site. The existing site has a modular, which I've talked to the county about perhaps dismantling and moving to Gerlach for crew quarters at the Gerlach Fire Department. But there needs to be some study as to whether or not it can actually be transported down the highway. So we'll be doing some study on that. I want to understand if we need to leave the site completely bare and tear down the existing truck bay, or just leave it for whoever purchases it to do that demolition. So we'll study those two costs, but the appraisal will commence, I believe we'll have that ready by March, and so we should be able to present that to you at the March meeting. And then we'll be looking for some direction from the board to enter into negotiations with either Mr. Crater or put it up for sale at large.
Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I recognize this to be Commissioner Lucy's district. That said, however, I think it's important for the sake of transparency, if we give only one person an opportunity to purchase that could be an issue. I think we'd be better off putting it up for sale and allowing the public, whomever wants to come forward and purchase the property. I think that's really the fair way to do it and the transparent way to do it. And then that circumvents any discussion or accusations of impropriety on the part of TM. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair. Commissioner, Vice Chair Jung.
Thank you very much. I agree with that, and
I do too.
because we want the market to bear the greatest amount of money that we can get from this land, and who knows who would come in, especially how tight we are right now, right? So I think that that's a good point. And then another part of your chief report, if I may, are we done with this item, or?
I am.
You are? Okay. I have a question. I know I've asked about this before in the past, and I don't know if the law has changed, but when I'm looking at your report of major incidents, and it is determined that a wildland fire is caused by arcing electrical wires from the power source, the power provider, in this case NV Energy, what is their liability if it then takes out a whole subdivision because they hadn't properly maintained either the shrubbery around their easement or the proper workings of the actual equipment? Can we get a legal later definition or explanation? Because I saw it in other states, they're actually going after these power companies and hold them liable for the destruction either of the wildland interface. We're going to see a lot of that with the fires in California right now as well. So I want to know where we're at and what we can possibly do to not have all the liability of somebody else's mistake.
Well, I think the first question would be whether or not the district or the county had liability, and then the second question would be whether or not the power company or the provider, whoever had any liability. Each case would obviously need to be evaluated on its own merits. In a clear case where somebody was patently negligent, the company was patently negligent, then it makes it a little bit easier. If they're not negligent, then, like always, it's going to be a gray area.
Sure. Okay.
But noted, and we'll see if we can take a look at it and come back to the board.
Thank you, Mr. District Attorney. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Jung. I would add one other thing also. I agree with Commissioner Hartung. Again, sorry, everybody. I do have a voice somewhere, I just can't find it. I agree with Commissioner Hartung that we need to look very seriously at putting the property there up to bid, because since we're not a GID, I think we're required by law to do that. Only GIDs can sell property behind the scenes. So I think that we need to make sure we're following the rules. And so unfortunately, I've had more than my fair share of having to deal with this issue lately. So it has come to my attention that we need to make sure that we do not sell this behind the scenes. So I think we're better off if we just come out front and put it up for bid. Anything else, Chief?
Items number B and C are the career statistics and volunteer statistics. I'll let those reports stand unless there's any questions from the
Okay.
board.
Commissioners, any questions? All right, let's go to 9.
Item 9 is presentation, discussion, and possible direction to staff regarding strategic goals and objectives for fiscal year 18-19. We'll be starting our budget work very, very soon. Chief Gordon and I will be talking to the union about some of the issues that they would like to see developed out of the next year's fiscal year budget. But I think at the top of the list, of course, is hiring more people. One of our goals is, again, to see either the rescue as a permanent resource at Station 15. I know labor would love to see that upgraded to an additional engine, or perhaps even a ladder truck. And then staffing our tender stations with 4 people. Obviously, that's a lot of employees to do in 1 year, but nevertheless, it's a long-term goal. And the 4th person at Station 35 in Verdi has proved to be very beneficial for us. But the rescue has actually been phenomenal for us, and I think the employees would agree. So I've given you kind of a long list here of what we're going to focus on from kind of a high level. Those are the staffing needs. We've talked a little bit about a new standards of cover, and I think that's very, very important that we do. We need to understand where our low acuity EMS calls are. And again, we talked about that in the chief's report, is finding a way that we can respond a lower level resource to those, because I feel strongly that it is not sustainable to be able to have a system where we're sending a fire truck to each and every call, and particularly as we're growing out every EMS call with low acuity, I should say, and looking for ways to deal with the growth in call volume. But one of those strategies might be to reduce the call volume by taking back some of those low acuity calls and sending a lower level resource. So I think that's a key. That is a key strategy. We'd like to study CPSE accreditation, which is the Center for Public Safety Excellence. That's a very, very long, arduous process, but it's not the value in that study is not at the end of the day that you get accredited. It's the value and understanding where your weaknesses are as an organization and where you need to fill gaps, and having a plan for a master plan to grow the department to meet those objectives. So we would not embark on that until we have a full understanding of what's involved in that. But it is a very, very heavy lift to get that, but nevertheless, it may be of value to do that for the next 2 or 3 years. So I did want to just open this up to the board and see if there are other strategic or budget items that you would like staff to take a look at as we get started.
Okay, Commissioner Jung?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Chief, in terms of going for this accreditation, what's the cost? What's the benefit? like, are we more qualified for grants? What does it really give us? And who else in the region is accredited? And if not by this, what are they accredited by, and what's the difference?
Well, there's two organizations that tend to measure fire department effectiveness. One is ISO, which gives a grading schedule. We're a class 3/9, so the rural areas are a 9 where they don't have water supply, and we're a class 3 where we do have water supplies. That really is a model that I think benefits the insurance company and helps them understand what their risk is, and so helps them set premiums. Really doesn't help us as a fire department know where our gaps are. So there are no other fire departments that I am aware of in Northern Nevada that are accredited, nor are pursuing accreditation.
Of CPSE?
Yes.
Okay.
The cost is largely going to be in staff time, and again, it's a lot of work. Chief Gorgon and I are planning to go to a class to understand exactly what the process is. It's in February 21st, I believe, over in Davis, California. And I believe the city of Sparks is going to join us, as well as perhaps the airport authority. So it doesn't necessarily help us with grants or with any kind of funding. What it does, again, is it tells us through a series of objective measures and peer review through other accredited fire departments actually come in and look at the body of work that we did in the study and actually approve whether or not we're an accredited agency. So again, the value is to understand where our gaps are as a fire department and make a plan to fill those gaps over the long term.
Okay, I think it's great, and I think that that probably also means that when or if you get accredited, then you will be part of a peer review and going to other similarly situated areas, learning, different ways that it is developing as a science, right, instead of the old school way. So yeah, I fully endorse and support that, and I hope that we're first if we decide to do it, because I'm not competitive at all. Okay, in the region, let's be first. Thank you.
Anything else on this, Chief?
No, Madam Vice Chair. Or,
Commissioners?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I'm too used to saying Vice Chair.
Whatever.
Apologize.
Commissioners, any other questions, comments? Okay. Do we,
For the record, there's no public comment on that.
okay, I was going to say, do we need to take action on this?
I'll move to approve the chief's strategic goals and objectives for FY 18-19.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Commissioner Lucy? And we have, excuse me, no public comment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Chief?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 10 is discussion and possible direction to staff regarding methodology to calculate the cost to provide service to Sierra County, California. We've been in discussions with Sierra County, California about our service to them. Historically, we've only charged $10,000 going back quite a few years, and I think it would be fair to say that $10,000 doesn't even come close to covering our costs, or is it necessarily a fair amount? So in talking to the county manager in Sierra County, he has asked us to come up with a methodology, and they have, as their board of county commissioners, have approved a special assessment area to charge the cost of us providing service. So our purpose was to develop a methodology and just run this by the board to see if you thought it was fair. I'll ask Cindy Vance to come up and explain how we develop the calculation, and if the board thinks we're on the right track, then our next step is to develop an agreement.
Cindy Vance, Chief Fiscal Officer, for the record. As Chief has mentioned, we're working on a new contract with the Sierra County. Looking at the services they're requesting to be provided are based mostly on structural fire suppression and emergency medical services. Sierra County is willing to apply a special assessment. We were able to obtain a list of their parcels within the district area that they're looking to request our services. What we did was come up with a fee equivalent to the amount of tax Truckee Meadows residents pay based on the square footage of parcels improvements. So we did have on that spreadsheet that they provided the improvement value on the parcels. We were able to compare that with a sample of Verdi area and with Cold Springs area, and the cost per parcel that we're cost per square foot that we're assessing in those areas came up with approximately 21% per square foot in the Verdi area and 10 cents per square foot in the Cold Springs area. So we'd like to bring this back to Sierra County as a request for a special assessment based on that. And that would be an estimated approximately $40,000 annual revenue for services to Truckee Meadows beginning in fiscal year 2019.
Thank you. Commissioner Hartung? Oh, sorry. I don't think you're on.
Hello?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. I was about to say I'm Johnny Cash. Chief, what would it cost Sierra County to supply the service themselves? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, and I'm not trying to be obtuse here, although it may seem that way, they're benefiting from an economy of scale from us. If they had to supply those services themselves, it would cost them far more than $40,000 to institute fire service and emergency medical service and et cetera. So what I might suggest is that there's a base fee of, let's say, $40,000, and then there's some type of remuneration on a per-call basis.
I'm going to do it today.
I mean,
My staff did.
again, they're benefiting from our economy of scale, and we've had to build the stations, we've had to buy the equipment, we've had to go through the labor negotiations, we got to pay our labor, we've got all of the supplies that are associated with running a fire service. And so if they had to build that from the ground up, it'd cost them far more than that. And I'm not trying to hold them over a barrel, but it's just like any other business. When I go to do business with, let's say, a machine shop, the benefit of me doing business with that machine shop is that they've spent $1 million on CNC lathes in order to do this very complex job. And I complain that he's going to charge me $100 for it. Go and buy the equipment yourself then. So again, it's that economy of doing business, and while I recognize that there are neighbors, there's still a cost of doing business that we're absorbing in that economy of scale. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hartung. Vice Chair Jung.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Could you tell me, so you said it's 21 cents average tax per square foot in Verdi, California, and it's 10 cents the average tax per square foot for the Cold Springs, California area. So what is the actual effective tax rate going to be for Sierra? An average of those two? A higher of those two?
The lots could be, we believe they could be broken down to be charged within the area, that 10 cents within that Cold Springs area, and that within the Verdi area, they would be
Oh,
at
so it's
21%.
parallel of what?
Yes.
Okay. And then to Commissioner Hartung's point, have we looked at what kind of budget Sierra County has and how much money they're making off of those properties in property tax, which is a heck of a lot higher than we're making in Nevada side of property taxes, and maybe go into it, negotiate it in that way, because we don't collect property taxes to the level that California does. And as we are booming, right, so is California, and they don't have tax caps like we do. They don't have all those constraints. I just love to see their financials and how much they're bringing in, and is clearly 10,000 a year was a robbery, I think, but 40 might be as well. So let's dig a little deeper. I love the parity that you are insisting on that. However, it needs to be parity of scale in terms of how much they collect per parcel and how much we collect per parcel. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Jung. Commissioner Hartung. He's down again.
I think Commissioner Jung. Is this on now?
Yeah, now it's on.
Thank you. I'd rather push the button myself, guys. I think Commissioner Jung makes a cogent argument about what would they collect for fire, and what is their standard collection and their disbursement and maybe they don't do a direct assessment for fire. Perhaps it's built into their overall budget, but you know that I think Commissioner Jung makes a very salient point with respect to what would they charge to supply that same service.
I understand that there is a fire protection district that covers part of the Verdi, California portion that you see on your map. The problem is geographically is they can't get there.
Right.
It's like what they say in the Appalachians, you can't get there from here.
That's not our fault, Chief.
So what Sierra County charges, I don't know, but I don't believe the county charges anything for fire. So in the past, those payments have come out of their general fund.
They draw out of the GF. Okay. Well, you know, I guess where I come from is we've received letters, not kind letters, from people who live in Verdi, California, demanding that we up their fire service. And we are now talking about upping their fire service. And so it's just like anything else. You got to pay to play. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be obtuse, but that's the reality of having someone across the line. And I think Commissioner Jung is absolutely right. It'd be interesting to see what they collect in property taxes versus somebody who lives just on the other side of the line in Verdi. And I'll wager to you, Commissioner Jung is 100% correct that the people in Nevada are paying far less taxes than the people in California. I mean, what a wonderful point, Commissioner Jung. Thank you. You're spot on. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner, Vice Chair Jung.
Well, excuse me.
Your turn.
Hello? Tech difficulties. Hello? Okay.
There you are.
I think, and another way to look at it is certainly, you know, as human beings, it is our problem if they can't get to a fire, right? But we also have a fiduciary responsibility that we are not subsidizing a different area by our taxpayers subsidizing that. And we are a fledgling new department, doing well, fledgling in a nice way, not in a bad way, doing well, but we need to shore up and become sustainable through the long term. Not that we're not today, but I just feel like the more that it's fair, the more I can argue if we ever needed to raise fire tax. But if citizens see that we're subsidizing this, I could never make the argument. And remember, we raised taxes for fire when we created this district. 2012. Yep, in 2012. So I think that's another way that you could go about it, is that, you know, we need to protect our people, and they took a chance on us, and we took a chance on Chief Moore, and it's turned out great. But we need to shore that up to make sure that it's just fair and square and completely transparent. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So do we have any public comment on this?
No, Madam Chair.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? I think I need a motion to give the chief some additional direction. Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would make a motion that we give the chief direction to continue negotiations and continue his investigation into cost recovery so that there is parity in terms of what we bring to the table. And again, that said, I agree with Commissioner Jung. You know, I don't want to let him burn. I'm not going to let him burn. I'm not going to let him die. That's not going to happen. But for that service, you know, just like every place else in the nation, you have to pay for it. So I think negotiations are still warranted, and further investigation is still warranted.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Chief, did you get enough direction to that?
Got it.
All right, we have no public comment. Any additional comments from commissioners? Commissioner Hartung?
Hello.
There you go.
Thank you. I think it needs to be noted that we don't, because of the state line division, we don't represent any of these people politically. Not that that's a bad thing, but they're not our constituents. And our fiduciary responsibility is to our constituents, regardless of what district they lie in. So
Good point.
that's my final comment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Chief?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 11 is discussion of possible direction to staff regarding a district facilities master plan to include existing fire stations and possible additional career and volunteer stations for possible action. Just briefly, we're going to have to leverage consultants on this. The plan is to assess all of our current stations for their condition and improvements that they may need to understand if they're in the right spot for future growth, and also to understand where we're going to need future stations and get together a plan for the next 10 years on facility development. The board may recall that we purchased some software that will help us model where new stations need to be and test whether or not stations are in the right spot relative to the calls that they serve. So we think that this plan will cost anywhere from $75,000 to $150,000, perhaps we'll spread that across 2 fiscal years. But nevertheless, we want to be thorough and really understand what the needs are in each individual station.
Good, thank you, Chief. Commissioners, questions? Comments?
Just a comment, Madam Chair.
Commissioner
I
Hartung?
think that this is timely. You know, when you look on our on the call volumes, and I'm not trying to point this out, but Sun Valley, huge call volume, 160 calls a month. That's just for emergency medical. Total 229, followed closely by 180 in Spanish Springs. Not a pejorative comment about West Washoe Valley, but they're at 15. You know, so we really do need to look at how and where we're building stations and how we're utilizing our resources. I mean, these guys at Station 15, I mean, they're definitely the training station. I mean, they're doing every kind of call that you can imagine, and it's constant. I mean, those are telling numbers. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hartung. Chief, will this study that you're proposing look at annexations by the city?
Well, I think part of the study will be to look at what Reno's plans are for new fire stations as well as the city of Sparks, and to see if there can be some efficiencies. You know, you and I spoke about the Stonegate proposal and some $6.5 million that the city would require of the developer, but Cold Springs is 2.5 miles away from Stonegate. So there obviously need to be some discussions between the fire departments and perhaps between council and the commissioners about how all of us are going to be strapped to try to build fire stations. I mean, the cost of construction is very, very high, and I'm not sure how the city would build the 5 stations that are proposed in their master plan, and the 3 that I know I could start construction on today. And I know that I have talked to the Sparks Fire Chief. We've had some informal discussions about perhaps even sharing a station. So yes, I don't know that they would address annexation per se, but they should address some economies of how we can potentially help each other.
I'm specifically concerned, or I'm not concerned, I don't think is the right word, but I'm specifically talking about Verdi. How much of Verdi is in Reno's annexation plan. And I know that the three of us sit on the Regional Governing Control Board, and we're working on our new master plan for the community, and maybe that will come up in this. I don't know, Vaughn, if Commissioner Hartung, I don't know if that is a topic that either you or Commissioner Herman have had with a discussion with the City of Reno, but I think that maybe that's something that we want to look at as we look at this overall fire service plan. You know, you have done a fabulous job of setting this fire department district up. We have built stations. We're, you know, hiring staff as we need. But now, what's the next step? And I think that's where these studies, these master plan studies, come in. Is what's the next step? And so I think it's important for us to know: do we need to do something more in Verdi, or is Reno going to annex Verdi into Reno, and it's going to become all of Reno? And we don't need to be there. I mean, we offer automatic aid services from our station, but do we need to do more from our station or more in that community? I'm curious about that. I absolutely know we're not there yet, but what's Reno's plan for the next 5 years?
That's a good point, Madam Chair. And in fact, Station 14, when it was first built, it was in the country. And now it's completely surrounded by the City of Reno. So we do not want to invest $5 million in a new station only to see it end up in what happened to Station 14, because we lose our investment and we lose the ability to respond to calls even when they're 500 feet away. You don't get
That's
called.
right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a concern. Commissioner, Vice Chair Jung.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Chief, can we, and this kind of bleeds back into your strategic goals and objectives, this facilities master plan. I wonder if we can't speculate based on data and past behavior what the city will be annexing and how much it's going to cost us as a fire agency, so that we can do some strategic planning that somewhere that could be supplanted. Because I get it. You don't get the money anymore because you're really not doing the work, but you really are doing the work because of our mutual and auto aid. It's probably something we're going to have to go to the legislature for anyways. We know it's an issue, this annexation issue, but I wonder if you couldn't put a team together and just kind of look at land use planning and the way growth is supposed to go through regional and that sort of thing, and look at what we are potentially losing and what we should potentially maybe even be selling some of our stations to a developer in Reno if they're going to go ahead and take it, and they can take our station and then put houses on it or whatever. But I think that's a little bit more where we should be going now, especially that we're looking into this boom that we're feeling.
Good point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Okay. And I want to be on record making it clear that in no way, I don't think this board in any way wants to lessen the impact of our fire service in Verdi. We want to improve our fire service in Verdi. That's not the goal here. We're just looking from the perspective of not spending money that ultimately 5 years down the road is just going to come back to cost us. And I am curious also, and I don't think I guess this could be part of the master plan also. What are the requirements? What is the state law regarding whether or not we can require a developer to build a fire station for us? And so if you could look into that as part of the master plan program or as part of future planning, that would be, I think, beneficial for us to have some idea of exactly what the state law is as it relates to us. Okay? Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would respectfully possibly rephrase that to say, how do we match our first response with the need? And I think that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
When we need to send a fire engine, let's send a fire engine. If we've got to send 3 fire engines, let's send 3 fire engines. And if we need help, let's need help. But if Commissioner Hartung has cut the end of his finger off with his table saw, that doesn't require a fire engine. And I'm trying to be respectful with that.
Right,
That's
yeah.
That's an emergency medical response for them to stop the bleeding until REMSA can transport me and they can reattach the end of my finger, hopefully. my point is.
Hopefully you don't do that.
My,
Okay.
hopefully I don't either. I pay close attention, quite frankly. But I use that as an example of things that we respond to constantly. And so I would say it's that first response. How do we match that level of first response with the need, at whatever it happens to be, throughout the system? And that as an overall part of the strategic plan, as opposed to throwing the kitchen sink at everything.
Good point.
That's my opinion, Madam Chair.
Good point, Commissioner Hartung. Anything else, Chief?
No, Madam Chair.
Do we have any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I know we're running out of time, and I'll be quick on item 12. Discussion and direction to staff regarding the Green Waste Pilot Program to include support of the program and the development of a request for proposals to acquire capital equipment in support of the program. Basically, what staff is looking for here is, before we would develop an RFP, we'd like to look at purchasing mobile equipment and dumpsters for some of the reasons that I gave the board last week, and I got about a 30-second video if I could show, if we could cue that up. We've made a significant investment in equipment. We have a chipper, we have a burn box, and we also have a masticator that was purchased by Sierra Fire District back in the day. And we use this device to take these piles and just basically crunch them up, and then we can take that debris and put them in dumpsters and take them to a recycling center. So this does a great job on limbs and sagebrush. Sagebrush doesn't go through the chipper very well. It burns okay, but again, we're looking to not burn as much as we possibly can. So we took this huge pile of waste that we collected at Lemon Valley, and at about 45 minutes of the masticator, it basically reduced that huge pile
That's great.
to chips. But in order to do a comprehensive program, we think that we'd like to buy more equipment and develop an RFP. So if the board doesn't have any issues with continued investment in the Green Waste Program, we'll move forward on an RFP, which is a lot of work, and bring that back for your consideration.
Okay, Commissioners? Commissioner Hartung?
Chief, on.
There you go.
There
Yeah,
we
you're
go.
on.
I think part of this is, and I actually have this need personally, and I know I don't stand alone with this. I have a need for assistance in creating some defensible space. And so what I'd like, and I recognize it doesn't, I'm not looking to circumvent the system and have the fire service come out for free. I mean, there's ways that we can allow people to donate to the fire service, which would be very helpful. But what I'd like to see is I'd like to see an assistance with defensible space, with the defensible space program, because the bottom line and the point from A to B is this: if we can help people create that defensible space, that means we can save structures, and that's less of a response that we have to have at some future time. And so I think as part of this green waste program, assisting people to make sure that they've created that defensible space is an important aspect, not for free. I mean, if they cannot afford to pay, if we've got people in Sun Valley who cannot afford to pay, I understand completely. I am not one of those people. I can afford to pay, and I'll have somebody come out and do it, but I'd rather give the money to the fire service, especially if we've got that equipment. So, and it's not competing with, some private entity. I think that this has real merit for defensible space, not clearing my lot so I can build a house. That's not what we're talking about. This is about defensible space. Thank you.
Okay. All right, do we have any public comment on this issue?
No, there's no public comment.
All right, Chief, anything else?
No, ma'am.
Commissioners, anything else?
Move to approve.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Chief?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 13 is Commissioners, Fire Chiefs announcements, requests for information, topics for future agendas, and statements relating to items not on the agenda. I have no announcements.
Do you have anything else, Chief?
I do not.
Commissioners? Commissioner Jung, Vice Chair Jung?
May I make a suggestion that the Washoe County work crew might be a great use for you to use these masticators and load up the debris, et cetera, rather than having to negotiate the contract to take care of that? We can't go on private property? Oh, will you look into it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments? Chief, I am curious, do we have and you may have to investigate this and bring it back to us, and that's fine. I understand we have a automatic aid agreement with the city of Reno for the Cold Springs area as it relates to fire?
Yes, and we have automatic aid agreements everywhere where we interface, including the city of Sparks.
I know
So
we do.
yes, with Cold Springs.
But only as it relates to fire, not as it relates to anything else?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will move on to the final comment.
14 is public comment. Madam Clerk, is there any public comment?
We have Sam Dene.
Good morning, Mr. Dene.
Hello, Sam, DNA Dene, the heart and soul and the body and mind of Reno government. And I say that because, you know why I say that? Because it's true. It's a fancy way of saying that I am the greatest guard angel against government and especially against media wacko freaks in the history of the world. If anybody wants to come up, and there we have once again, the sheriff's deputy coming here to protect me against perfidiousness and mendacities back there that might be happening. Thank you again, officer. At any rate, I am the greatest castigator of media wacko freaks in history. I choose them off every day, every week, every year. What kind of cowards are those lazy, sleazy Reno Gazette and the rest of the media wacko freaks to allow Sam to come up here and choose them off? Everything I say obviously is true, and they must know it is true, or they would say at least Sam needs therapy or something. Not a word. What kind of a city, world is this? Does it deserve anything good when all of you sit there and let these media wacko freaks lie to you, or lie to you by refusing to print the truth, which is even worse than a lie? I've done more for this community than all of the rest of the citizens added together, and it's on the record. You can go from saving Burning Man to saving the Air National Guard to even nominating our chief of police, and I could go on and on and on. It's just a disaster what goes on in this community, because of the wacko freak media wacko freaks. The government has its problems, no doubt about it. These guys, Reno City Council, even the fire department has its problems, but none of the problems are as bad as the horrible, horrible media that we have here. Donald Trump has it easy with the media compared to me. I am the 500-ton elephant in the middle of every room that the media wants you to think does not exist. And unfortunately, not enough. It should be mandatory for people to watch my hundreds and hundreds of YouTubes before you are allowed to vote, because you don't know what's going on thanks to the evil, lying, yellow-bellied media wacko freaks. Did I make my point? Does anybody understand what I just said?
Mr. Dene,
Deers in the headlights, I see them out there.
Mr. Dene, please address us.
Thank you. I think, you're welcome.
There's
Any
no
other
more
public
public
comment?
comment. No.
Okay, we will close public comment, bring it back to the board, and